Well, welcome back again, guys. It's Kasim or Cass, for those of you who've never heard me before and you've never listened to me before. In fact, really, you can call me Kasim, you can call me Cass, you can call me monkey, dog, elephant, turtle, good looking, handsome, whatever it is that you want. I'm not fussy. You can literally call me whatever it is that you want to call me. So, as you've probably seen from the title of this, I'm going to be sharing with you today my story. And my story is crazy. And I never realized how crazy my story was until two things, well, I guess three things started happening. One, I started journaling about it and started writing about it in the books that I've been writing. Two, I started going to schools and colleges and universities and telling people a little bit about my story. And in three, on reflection, as I've been to therapy and I've been journaling and I've been talking to other people, I've come to realize that my story isn't common. My story is wild and it's made an impression on people, like a really big impression of people. And I'll go into it a little bit more in just a second, but I want to begin off by sharing something with you that I thought is quite revealing. So, after a lot of things happened in my life, I started doing a lot of journaling. Journaling, really just writing about what I wanted, what I feared, what was working in my life, what wasn't working in my life. And I want to start off by sharing with you some of the things that I wrote down. Okay, here we go. Does life get easier? Is having lots of friends important as an adult? Is it true that all you want to be is a kid after living adult life? Why does it feel like I'm going nowhere in my life no matter how hard I try? How can I bring myself to be a better man? Does pain ever heal? Will I ever get anywhere in life? How do I get a girlfriend? Why do I hate my mum? How do I get rid of all of this hate in my heart? Is it okay to get bad grades and to be a failure? What should I do to stay motivated? That right there is very revealing, because when I wrote these things are what I call a reluctant truth. I didn't want to look at these things and I didn't want to write these things. And honestly, it was quite shocking to me that I even felt some of those things. For example, that one where it says, why do I hate my mum? It was very shocking to me that I had arrived at a place in my life internally where I felt that I hated my mum. And I felt so guilty and I felt so shameful that I'd got to a place where a child, a boy, a man can hate his own mother. And I was like, that's crazy. And I was like, does that make me a bad person? And we're going to delve into all of this. But I just wanted to begin that off to really set the tone, because I'll be honest with you, I'm going to go deep today. Okay, I'm guessing anyway, if you're listening to me, you don't mind deep conversations, but my story is a bit extreme and a bit crazy and a bit mad. And for somebody who is so young, I've been through an incredible amount. And as I say, I never actually realized how much I'd been through until I started deconstructing and really becoming aware of what I'd gone through and starting to pull it apart and seeing what works, what hasn't worked, and how I've ended up where I've ended up. So before we go backwards, most people who tell their story, they usually begin right at the beginning in their childhood. I'm going to go there in just a second, but I actually want to begin by telling you where I am now, because I think it will set the tone and give you context as to why I decided to do this video. So, I currently work for a digital mental health company, and my job is that I go to schools, colleges, universities, basically anywhere where there are young people between the ages of 10 and 25, and I hold workshops and hold training sessions about mental health. So things around empathy, kindness, stress, anxiety, and in this, I've been every single week, every day, I've probably been going to about 4 schools. So I have seen, and I work across Southwest London. So that's Richmond, Sutton, Merton, Croydon, Wandsworth, and Kingston. So a very broad area. I go to grammar schools, I go to private schools, I go to international schools, you name it. If there are young people between the ages of 10 and 25, people who are 25 aren't exactly young, but I will basically go there and talk to them. And then, before I ended up doing that job, I was working in a school as a behavior support worker. So my job involved dealing with young people who were truanting, so were not going to lessons, who were late all the time, who had issues with their uniform, who were having problems at home, who had been neglected. So a huge amount of my time was spent working with young people who had really, really, really difficult backgrounds. I'm telling you this for a reason. So bear with me. Now, I also currently are literally just on the crux of just about to finish and qualify as a psychotherapist or counselor. And I've been spending the last 3 years training to be able to do this. As well as this, so in my final clinical year, which is my final year now, I actually work in a school. So I go into a school every Friday and I do counseling. On top of this, I also run and co-facilitate a over 18s anxiety and depression group, right? That's for over 18s. People come and they support each other and they talk about their anxiety and their stress and their depression and try to get coping mechanisms and support from other people in the group. The other thing that I also do is that I write books. I write books around mental health, which are specifically aimed for men who are struggling with different aspects of their life. And the reason why this is important is because when I was 26, I had reached a lot of the goals that most people would say they want in their life. And I'll go back to this in a sec, like laid down in my story. But I had achieved what most people would want. And I had a massive problem, which was, what the hell am I going to do for the rest of my life? And I decided that I wanted to help men on the first 2 steps of goal set of basically trying to change their life. I didn't want to help them with step 8, 9, or 10. I wanted to help them with the first few things. What did you have to do in order to change your life? What did you have to do in order to build a life and cultivate the kind of life that you want, or turn things around, or heal, or start going down the path of success? What is it that it takes? And all my books are around this. Now, one of my books is a goal setting book, because I wrote that book specifically because in working in schools and colleges and the previous school that I used to work in and doing my workshops, I used to meet a lot of young people and they would say to me, how do I decide what I want to do in life? How do I turn my life around? I've been bullied, I don't have a dad, my mum has abused me, whatever it may be that their story is, I want to turn it around. How do I do that? And I wrote that book because I wanted to give men a blueprint that they could use in order to figure out how to move forward with their life, right? And I break it down into 6 steps. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this and why this is relevant is because the first step in that book is called story. And basically what I say in that first step is that in order to transform your life and to build the kind of life that you want, you need to see where you're at and what has brought you to where you're at. You need to know what your story is. You need to know, if you look at both your parents and your upbringing and the people who you've been surrounded by and your ideology and your attitude and your philosophy and your results, you want to know, how did I get here? In other words, you cannot change something that you're not aware of. You cannot improve something that you cannot measure, right? You cannot know that, let me tell you, let me use a story to demonstrate. So in the book, I begin the book off by telling a story, and it's one of my favorite stories. It goes something like this. There are these 2 young fish which are swimming along, and as they're swimming along, they're having banter, they're having jokes, they're having a good time, and in the opposite direction to them, there's an older fish which is swimming towards them, and he's just paddling along and he's having a good time himself. And as the young fish and the older fish come and meet, the older fish says to the young fish, "Good morning, boys. How is the water this morning?" And the young fish look at the old fish like, what a weirdo. Now I know fish don't talk, but just go with the story. And the young boys look at the older fish and they're like, weirdo, okay, whatever. And so they carry on swimming, having banter, and he looks at them and he looks back and he also carries on swimming. A little while down the road, one of the fish, the young fish, is like acting weird and he's going into deep thinking and he's really confused. And his friend says to him, "What's up, man? What's going on with you?" And he says, "Oh, nothing, man. There's nothing wrong." And his friend says, "Well, I can tell that there is something wrong with you. What's going on? Why are you acting sus? Why are you acting weird?" And he says, "No, man, I was just thinking, what the hell is water?" And the point of this story is, how do you know if you were born in water and you're raised in water and water is all that you know, how would you know that you're in water? And the reality is that you wouldn't, until one day something terrible happens that forces you to be dragged out of the water, or one day you become conscious and start thinking about your environment and paying attention to your life, right? Obviously, this is a metaphor for human beings, for talking about what are our results, who is surrounding us, what is our philosophy, what is our attitude. By the way, a philosophy is just simply a conclusion. So you take where you've been, what you've heard, what you've seen, what you've experienced, and you come up with a conclusion. That's basically what a philosophy is. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to share with you really my story. Because what I've come to realize is that as I've been sharing my story and to young people and obviously just people in general across my life and people I interact with and professionals and young people, I began to realize that as I tell my story, it also helps other people to become more aware of their story. But my story is so diverse and so crazy and has so many parts that most of the time I've never really actually told the full totality of my story. So what I'm going to try to do, it's a big story, but I'm going to attempt to try to tell the full story of what happened to me leading up to today. There are aspects of my story that are just too complex and that are too detailed and too many things happened in order for me to get there. But I'm going to try to give you a broad overview of how I ended up where I am today, kind of talking to you about this story. And as I say, I hope it can add some value to you or not, I don't know. I'm just going to tell the story irrelevant anyway and put it out into the universe. So let's go backwards. Let's begin at the very beginning. So I already said my name is Kasim, or Cass. I was originally born in Uganda. For those of you who don't know, Uganda is towards the east of Africa. So it's surrounded by countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, the Republic of Congo, Zimbabwe. It's surrounded by countries like that. So it's a very tropical country. You get a lot of things like, I don't know if you've ever tried anything like sugarcane, mangoes, tilapia. If you've ever eaten tilapia, we have Lake Victoria is the biggest lake there in Uganda. And so it is, as I say, it's a very, very, very tropical country. We have snakes there as well. My mum had me when she was 15 years of age. And when my mum first got pregnant, she went and told my biological father that she was pregnant, and he did not want anything to do with my mum. He said, "It's not my son, it's not my kid, I don't want anything to do with him." Basically, she abandoned my mum. My mum made a lot of effort to try and, contact him and try to liaise with him to try to, get him to take responsibility, but he basically wasn't interested. Now, this part of the story is important because this now set the foundation for a major theme in my life, which was abandonment. Okay? I say to people all the time that one of the major issues that I've had in my life is making friends. And really connecting with people. And a huge reason why I've struggled with this is because I've always kept people at a distance. If you speak to people who know me, and I only realized this upon reflection when I was journaling, a lot of people, I know a lot about a lot of people, but very few people know very much about me. A lot of people don't know my story. A lot of people don't know what I've been through. And part of the reason why that is because I've always kept people at a distance because I've always been scared of being abandoned. I've always felt like if I share with you my story and I share with you who I am, you might reject me. You might leave me, right? You might abandon me. So therefore, I'm going to ask everything about you and keep you at distance and never let you truly in on who I am, because then I don't want you to abandon me, and therefore I will stay safe. The issue with that, of course, is that it means that I've ended up a huge amount of my life never fully connecting with anybody, right? If you're looking at attachment theory, I am what they call avoidant, right? I want love, but I'm scared of it. Look up avoidant attachment theory, by the way. You might be very interested in it. So we're now going up to when I was 8. When I was 8 years of age, my mum moved from Devon, from Uganda, and we moved to an area of the UK called Devon, an area called Exeter. Exeter, when we first moved to England, it was a very different place to what it is now. Exeter, back when we first moved to England, was a very, very white area. In fact, from what I can remember, I was one of the only black kids in my school. That may not seem major to you, but just imagine going to your school and you're the only black kid. On top of all of this, this also started something which was not good. Basically, when I first moved to England, 2 things happened which became influential in my life. One, they put me back 1 year than the year that I was supposed to be in, because what they believed was, we want to give you time to catch up, we want to give you time to learn English, because remember, I grew up in Uganda, so I didn't know any English. I spoke Luganda. In Uganda, there's multiple languages, but the language that I spoke, so for example, people speak Swahili in Uganda as well, but in the language that we spoke was Luganda. And when we came to England, I didn't know any English. And so they said, right, we're going to put you back 1 year and we're going to allow you time to learn English, and you're going to be able to catch up, and you're going to have time and once you've caught up, then we're going to move you forward. The problem that happened is I never got moved forward. And this became a major thing because I always hated my birthday. And the reason why I hated my birthday is because on my birthday, I was always the oldest person in my year group. And this again started another theme in my life, which is the theme of always being the other and different, right? Most of my life, I've never really found my clique. I've never found where I belong. I've never found home for me, right? I like football, but I've never been a fanatic of football. I like sports, but I've never been a fanatic of sports. I like music, but there isn't a specific genre of music that I've been obsessed with, right? This is a theme that continues throughout my life, even today. In other words, I've always been an outsider. And obviously, a huge amount of growing up is that you want to fit in, you want to belong. Well, you don't want to be an outsider. You don't want to feel like you're different. Going back, the second thing that happened is that I started being bullied and getting racial issues. So kids would walk behind me and call me monkey. They'd call me gorilla lips. And one kid, I swear, made it his life's mission to make my life a living hell. He'd walk behind me, and at break time, he would go to the canteen, get a banana, come in front of me, eat the banana in front of me. He would then take the peels of the banana, like the banana breaks off in different, as you eat the banana, it breaks off in different peels. He would then take the peels of the banana and start sticking them underneath my collar. And sometimes, people say to me, Kasim, why didn't you tell your mum? Why didn't you tell anybody? Now, one, remember, I didn't know any English. And two, I don't know if you're going to relate to this or understand this, but I knew my mum. Okay, let me tell you something. If I told my mum that I was being bullied and I was receiving racism, my mum would be bringing neighbors, she'd be bringing random people off the street. My mum would be like, she would cause so much havoc for me in the school that it wasn't really worth it, right? I don't know if you can relate to that, but that's what my mum is like. So that's part of the reason why I never told my mum. And the issue with this is that students, on my birthday, kids would say to me all the time, Kasim, why are you 13 and we're 12? And they were like, is it because you're dumb? You get held back. And so this started this theme of me feeling unworthy, of me feeling that I'm stupid, of me feeling like I wasn't enough. Now, bear in mind that I didn't have the language for this back then, right? I'm talking in hindsight here now, and I'm talking of reflection. But back then, I never realized that that's how I felt. But what was happening was that I felt different, and I felt worthless, and I didn't feel worthy, and I wasn't accepted because I didn't find my in-group, okay? So bear all of this in mind. And so the other thing that started happening, which is a major thing that I should mention, is that when I first moved to England, the reason why we moved to England is because my mum had basically married my stepdad. And my stepdad is a white man, okay? Now, the reason why this is important is because when I was growing up, I never felt like I was part of my family because my mum, me and my sister, so my mum has 5 children in total, okay? Me and my sister are both have black parents. So my mum is black and my biological dad is black, and same with my sister. But the rest of my siblings are all mixed race because my stepdad is white. And when I was growing up, I never felt, and this is just my experience of living in my household, and it could be completely different for my siblings, but I always felt like the other, and I never felt that I was belonged to my family. I never felt like my stepdad truly loved me. And actually he would do subtle things, not on purpose, but he would do certain things, like he would hug my brothers and sisters, but not me, right? And he would buy them certain things like their bikes and not me. Actually, to be fair, my stepdad did actually buy me bikes and stuff. But I'm just saying to you my experience of what I felt. This doesn't necessarily mean that that was the reality of what happened, but my experience of what I was feeling is that I felt like the other. And remember, this is now adding to the fact that I didn't feel worthy, that I was always the other. And so I'm growing up in a family where I feel like I don't belong. It's funny, I was having a conversation with my sister where my mum had said that, oh, you're always welcome back at home, Kasim, this is your home. And it's funny because I was laughing with my sister and I was like, our family home isn't my home. I don't belong there. I've never felt safe. I've never felt like I belonged in that household, which sounds crazy, right? So that's where we're at with that. Now, the other thing that adds on to my story, which is really important, particularly when it comes to my sexuality, is that my family, my mum is a Muslim and was brought up in a Muslim household, and my stepdad was a Christian who was born in Paynton in Devon, so as white as you can get, in a Christian household. And in order to marry my mum, he had to convert to Islam, get circumcised, all that sort of stuff. And he married my mum within a few months of meeting her, and his family wasn't even at the wedding. So when we came to England, there was some hostility. Now, bear in mind that when my stepdad married my mum already had 2 kids. So he married a woman from Uganda, from a foreign country, married her without his parents being present, brought her to the UK, right? It's like, this is crazy, right? So the other thing that happened is that when I was growing up, there was just this tension that I could feel in my family, but I didn't know what it was and I couldn't put words in it, right? So this added to my unease and it added to my feeling of like, I don't know, like restlessness. I just never felt at home. I never felt safe, I guess, would be the way to explain it. Now, fast forward, where should I start? Let's move forward in my story and let's go to where my sexuality, because this plays a major part in my story. So basically, I am a bisexual man, in case you don't know. I've told it in various stories. But coming to the space of identifying as someone who's bisexual, you have to understand that I grew up in a household where in my family, my parents would say things like gay people would go to hell, it's not allowed. And I really struggled because I don't come across as somebody who you would say was a gay man, right? You wouldn't, I don't think I come across like that. And I had girlfriends, and you have to remember that when I was growing up, I didn't know that there was such thing as gay. The word gay didn't even come into my vocabulary. But I just never felt, I liked girls, I found girls attractive, but I always felt like, I don't know, I just felt like there were certain feelings that I felt, but I didn't know why I felt them, right? In other words, what I'm trying to say is, I had attraction to, I wouldn't even say I had an attraction to men. This is, even today, this is very complicated in that I still have to think about it, because it's not that I didn't have an attraction to men, because I've never been in love with a man, but I was open sexually. I was open to exploring stuff, okay? And I just grew up having to hide a lot of my sexuality from my parents because I have a very high sex drive, which now plays into another part of my story, which is the story of my sex addiction. So I had a sex addiction for a long time, and I was addicted to porn, and I would literally wank like 20 times a day. And this addiction of liking sex and being addicted to sex led me to a point where I was paying for prostitutes, both men and women prostitutes. It led me to a situation where I was very promiscuous in my 20s. I was involved in gangbangs, I was involved in sex parties, I attended saunas, I was involved in threesomes, both with men and women. And remember that this may sound fine for if you're an adult, and of course you can do whatever it is that you want, but you have to remember that this was around secrecy. And so there was a lot of shame, there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of guilt around this, right? The shame part, because I grew up in an Islamic household and all of this, and I didn't know whether I was gay, and I didn't know whether I was bi, and I didn't know what I was because I couldn't explore it, because I didn't know any gay people in my life, and I didn't know anything about being gay. And so I was just going through this situation where I was trying to figure out who I was and what I believed and what I wanted, but I couldn't explore it because I was still living at home, and my family is like really strong Islamic family. And it just all got really complicated. In this whole thing as well, I ended up in a situation where I had trained to become a massage therapist, and I was doing massages. And in the process of doing this, I would go, like, people would invite me and call me to go and give massages to their wives, men. And in the process of this, sometimes when I went to the men's houses, the men would say to me, I'm going to pay you like an extra £100. I want you to have sex with my wife. Which, of course, at the very beginning was insane and wild. But then I remember I did it once, and then I did it again, and then people would invite me again, and then people would say, can you watch? Now, remember, I'm talking about this in hindsight, but the reality is this stuff was crazy to me at the time, right? And so men would say to me, Kasim, well, can I watch? I'm willing to pay you more. And some men would then say to me, can you give me a massaging? Can I give you a blowjob and I'll pay you like an extra £400 and things like this? And now the reason why I'm saying all of this is because I grew up in a household where my stepdad as far as I experienced it, this was my experience. And remember, this is not the reality. This is just my story and how I saw it. My mum would ask for money all the time for my stepdad, and my stepdad would basically say, we don't have the money, we can't afford this, blah, 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 blah. The way that I saw it is that my stepdad would control my mum through money. And my mum I felt that she was trapped and she couldn't do a lot of the things that she wanted. So a huge amount of my motivation and what I wanted to do is that I wanted to always be rich. I always wanted money. I grew up on a council estate. I grew up on two council estates, actually. The first place we lived in Devon was a council estate. When we moved to the area where we were living in Reading, that was also a council estate. And in fact, we were one of the only people who owned our house on that council estate. And I grew up, I remember kids used to take petrol bombs and would throw them and would they would try to light cars on fire. They would steal quads, right? All kinds of things would happen. And so, yeah, that part of my life was really, 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 really crazy. And I did a lot of sexual promiscuity, and I tried everything. You name it, I've basically tried it when it comes to the sexual aspect of my life. And I say this to you because, you can grow up and feel like I'm not worthy, I'm not a child of God, I'm not enough because I've been through all of this stuff. But that stuff doesn't have to define you, right? You can turn it around, you can get support. This is why I'm saying all of this to you. Now, in amongst all of this, something else was also happening, which was contributed with the fact that I felt dumb, I wanted money, I felt like I wasn't enough, I was keeping secrets from my parents, from everyone, around my sexuality, all of this sort of stuff. Basically, I was hiding a lot of things internally. And so what ended up happening was I started drinking and I started doing drugs. Okay, and the drinking became a major problem because I ended up being arrested for drink driving twice. Remember, at that time I didn't realize, but what I was doing is I was using the alcohol to suppress my feelings, right? Because I didn't have anyone to talk to about what I was experiencing, what I was going through. I didn't have anybody. I didn't think anybody would understand. I didn't think anybody would get me, so I didn't have anywhere. And so all of that shame, all of that guilt, all of that self-loathing, all of that unworthiness was hidden inside of me and was just basically trying to come out. It was trying to escape, and it was coming through in my promiscuity, in my frustration, in my anger. When I was growing up, I used to be so angry all the time, right? I remember I used to hate my mum, and part of the reason why I used to hate my mum is because when I was 7 and we first moved to the UK, we found out that my biological father had moved to the UK and was living in London. And so my mum arranged for me to go and meet my biological father through my uncle and stuff. And I was so excited to go and meet him. Because, sometimes when I tell this to students and people are like, Kasim, why did you want to meet him? What a loser. Like, why the hell would you want to meet that guy who abandoned you? But for me, honestly, I wanted to meet him. I wanted to meet him because I was having identity issues. So I was like, is this guy going to look like me? I'm a Nando's fan. I like spicy food. I was like, does he like spicy food? Is he going to be a Chelsea supporter? Is he going to like the same music as me? I was trying to figure out who I was. And in all honesty, looking back at it, as much as I had a male figure who was my stepdad, I never felt like he was actually my dad, right? I was saying to you earlier on that I grew up in a household where I felt like the other. So I never really truly saw any black males who were like me. Now, I did actually, for a short period of my life, have an uncle who I used to go and see in London, but I hated him. Okay, he would say things to me, like for example, sometimes when I'm talking or I'm silent, I make this thing called, I don't know if you can sense that. And he used to say to me, well, you're not going to find a girlfriend if you keep doing that, blah, 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 all of this sort of stuff. What I actually think my uncle had figured out from a very young age is that I was very open sexually. I think he thought that I was gay, and he would say things to me. I can't remember exactly what he would say things to me, but I hated going to see him because I always felt out of place. I always felt like he didn't get me. He didn't understand me. I didn't think that he was empathetic towards me. I remember I got my ears pierced and he would say, boys don't do that. That is something that girls would do, right? And so I was constantly trying to doubt myself about who I was and all of this kind of stuff. And he didn't do it in a positive way, he did it in a negative way. So I never grew up with male figures. So trying to meet my biological father was really, really exciting for me. However, on Guy Fawkes Night, 2 weeks before I was supposed to meet him, my mum came up to me. You know, Guy Fawkes Night is a night when there's like the fireworks and stuff like that. My mum came up to me and she said, son, I need to tell you something. My mum said to me that my biological father had died. So I never actually got to meet him. I never got to answer a lot of the questions that I wanted to get answered. This then started as cascade. Obviously, I'm only now talking in hindsight because I didn't realize this at the time, but I began to get really, really angry, right? I just basically disconnected from the world, right? I didn't trust anybody. I remember I said to you, one of the themes of my life was abandonment and not feeling worthy. This also then added to my feeling of being abandoned. Like, that means that no matter what I want, it's never going to come to fruition. It's going to end. It's going to finish, right? And so I started getting like really angry, and I never really asked my mum about my biological father, which is why I got really angry. I would blame my mum internally that, and I don't know if this is going to make sense to you, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. Basically, I hated my mum because I felt that I couldn't ask her about my biological father because it would bring up a lot of pain for her. I was like, if I ask her about my biological father, it's like really painful. If I ask her about him, and like, what was he? What happened? Blah, 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 that sort of stuff. It would be really painful for her. She had a baby with this man who then ran off, let her raise a kid by himself. And then once she got contact with him and tried to get the son to see him, he died. And it's like, I don't want to bring that up for my mum. What a painful period. But internally, I then blamed my mum for trying to keep me away from my biological father and knowing about him. And I say this to you because this then created a apathy, a resentment between me and my mum. And when I was growing up, you know, I know this is going to sound really weird, but my mum never really hugged me. It's ironic because I am such a huggy person in real life. Like, if you met me, if you saw me, I love hugging people. I'm very into being a touchy-feely sort of person. I'm very, what is it called? I'm a physical touch, right? If you look at those expressions of love, right? I am definitely a physical touch kind of person. And actually quality time. I like spending quality time with people and talking, verbal. I like talking. And so when I was growing up, I never really trusted my mum. I loved my mum and I wanted the best for her, but I never really trusted her. You know, on this, one of the things I also wanted to say, and actually, I always saw this is going to be really weird and may sound weird, but I always saw my mum as weak because my mum, I felt, was trapped by the fact that she was depending on my stepdad for money, and many of the things that she wanted to do, she couldn't do because she didn't want to move forward in her career. I'd always say to her, why didn't you become a manager in your job? But my mum never wanted to become a manager in her job. So I always felt that my mum never reached her potential. And I saw my mum as if she was like weak and she wasn't strong as a person. It's ironic now because actually my mum is the strongest person I've ever met in my life. But back then, that's how I felt about my mum. And it just made me not want to really respect her, actually. So that was what I went through in that. So what's the other part of my story that I want to share? Okay, let's go here. So when I was 24, so I'd been trying to drink and loads of things had happened. And what ended up happening was that I ended up homeless. Okay, I was drinking a lot, I was in sales, and I was under a lot of pressure. By the time I was 24, I was earning £75,000, and I was under a humongous amount of pressure to have the latest car, to have the latest suit, to blah, 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 blah. Basically, when you're in sales, there is a lot of, everything is very external. There's a lot of things that are external, and you've got to try and impress yourself externally. And I'd been drinking a lot, and I'd been arrested twice, and I had been tasered by the police, and I tried to fight a police officer, and I'd ended up being taken into a police cell overnight because I was drunk. I'd been beaten up one night and almost broke my ribs when I was drunk, and I don't really remember what happened. But basically, my life was spiraling out of control. Okay. And when I was 24, I basically tried to take my life. And what ended up happening was, this was a wake-up call for me. Because the reason why this was a wake-up call and really started a huge amount of why I've ended up speaking to you today is because at that time, I had been with my girlfriend for 4 years. I was in the process of buying a flat. I was earning good money. I'd been traveling around the world, Ibiza, Las Vegas, Costa Rica. I'd been to Italy. I'd been to Spain. I'd been to festivals. I was going to nightclubs in Bristol, in Manchester, in Liverpool, in London. Like literally, I was living the life that most people could dream of. And then what ended up happening is at 24, obviously I tried to take my life. And that basically made me stop and start reflecting on how had I ended up in this situation. What the hell had happened, right? How can I possibly have everything and be depressed? And how can I be living this life that everybody could dream of, and yet I'm not happy, right? And what the hell had happened was really the question. And that really started the path of me trying to figure out what had happened. And of course, part of that was I started to deconstruct my life. I started to look back. I started journaling. What had happened? What do I want? What don't I want? For example, I discovered that I never really wanted to go to university. I never wanted to do law. I never wanted to do any of this sort of stuff, because the only reason why I did it and the only reason why I was earning so much money was because I wanted to make a lot of money so that if my mum ever needed money and wanted to, or ever divorced from my stepdad, I could have money to give her. But also this was intertwined with a complication of the fact that when I was growing up, a huge amount of who I was and what I was doing was trying to make my mum proud, which is kind of why I never felt safe to tell my mum about any of the struggles that I was having, because I wanted to make my mum proud. In Uganda, women basically don't use out. It's just not the same as like the UK or in America. Women don't usually have like high academic status and they have PhDs and stuff like that. Obviously some women do, but in Uganda most don't. In Uganda, a lot of women aren't like entrepreneurs and business women. Obviously some women do, but the vast majority of women, where they draw their status is from their children, right? In other words, how successful you are as a mother is in many ways dependent on how successful your children are. So if your child becomes a lawyer, a doctor, owns a business, that really is your social status. That's how well you've done as a mother. So a huge amount of the pressure that I had in my life is that I basically could never go through a coming of age. You know, a coming of age is, if you've ever watched a coming of age movie, it's where you experiment and you basically start discovering for yourself, what do I want? What don't I want? And you basically start pushing to the edges of your capacity. I did push the edges of my capacity and really went to the extreme version of things. In fact, I've come to learn I have an extreme mentality, meaning that when I do things, I take it to 100. I don't take it to 20. If I'm drinking, I just get absolutely smashed. And so a huge amount of this was trying to figure out for myself that since I didn't really technically have a coming of age, who am I? What is it that I want? What do I believe? And this caused massive issues for me, because the problem was that in order for me to really explore some of this stuff and deconstruct and figure out who I am and what I wanted and where I wanted to go, I had to face the truth. And the biggest truth, which was the biggest issue in my life, which was causing a huge amount of the problems, was around my sexuality. I'd basically never talked to a single person about my sexuality. I'd never talked to anybody about some of the things that I'd done. Basically, all of this stuff was trapped inside of me. And in order for me to really look at that and deconstruct it and see how I show up and how I want to move forward in my life, I had to look at that sexuality, because a huge amount of the secrecy, or a huge amount of the life, the way I was living my life, was around secrecy. I was trying to hide everything from my family and from people who knew me, because I didn't want to be shamed, and I didn't want people to see me a different way, right? And it's ironic, because for me, it's funny today, even though I'm a bisexual man, a lot of people don't know that I'm bisexual. And that's because I don't really tell anybody, because the way that I see it is, my sexuality is the smallest part of who I am as a person. It's really irrelevant to me, right? So the fact that I'm a kind person, the fact that I write books, the fact that I've been through a lot, that stuff is what really I lead my life with. My sexuality is the smallest aspect of my life. And this is actually part of the reason why. And so when I was trying to figure out who I was, particularly around my sexuality, I found it really difficult, because I didn't see myself as a gay person, because the way that I saw gay people, where they were feminine, they were camp, they were not into sports. But if you look at me, I love the gym. I love doing extreme sports. You know, I ran the entire length of Ireland from the bottom of it to the top. I ran on a treadmill for 12 hours non-stop, right? I like manly things. I'm not really attracted to feminine things. I don't like makeup. I don't really lean into the feminine side of me, right? And so it was really difficult for me, because I was like, well, how can I be gay if I don't lean towards all of that? And on top of all of this, in the context of when I was experimenting with men, I was experimenting with men not because I'd fallen in love with them, but because the circumstances which I was in a context of hookups, right? This wasn't an emotional connection. It was just sex. I love sex and I'm open sexually, which is what really complicated me, because I was like, well, is it that I like guys then, or don't I? Is it that I'm open sexually? But then if I'm open sexually and I do stuff with guys, doesn't that mean that I'm a little bit gay? So it was just confusing. And remember, on the backdrop of all of this is my family are still Muslims, okay? My family is still Muslims. So this really just further complicated things for me. And on top of all of this, I didn't know any gay people. So the first thing that I had to do in my process is I had to really face this reality. And I was like, okay, so what do I want? I went out on dates. Even to this day, I've never gone out on a date where I found somebody who I truly, truly like, right? In terms of a man. So that's where I obviously discovered that I was a bisexual man, because whilst I've never fallen in love with a man, I don't want to rule it out, because I wouldn't mind falling in love with a man. But also you have to remember that the other massive thing, which was on my radar, is that I was getting a lot of pressure from my family around, when are you going to get married? Remember, I'm the oldest son, right? So oldest son, when are you going to get married? When are you going to have kids? So a huge thing for me, particularly around my sexuality, was I really want kids. And if I'm gay, then I can't have kids. So yeah, I then explored it and I discovered I was bisexual, because I didn't want to say that I was gay because I like women, but I didn't want to say that I was straight because I wanted to be able to explore sexually, and I still have a very high sex drive, and I still open sexually to trying things. So I discovered there was something called bi-curious, but I don't really even like labels, but I know for the sake of labels, people like labels. But I don't even really like talking about this subject, but I'm only talking about it because what was happening in my life is a lot of the people couldn't understand me because there was a huge hole which was missing in my life, and a huge amount of my story wasn't making sense to a lot of people. So that is basically a huge amount of the broader context of my story, of what ended up happening to me. And I don't know if you have any questions. I don't know what you think about it, but I'd love for you to comment below or ask me further. Remember, I've given you a gloss of this story, okay? I have, like, so much happened in this time, like, I can't even begin to tell you. Like, people say to me all the time, Kasim, how the hell did you manage to change your life around? Because one of the pieces that I don't think actually I shared with you is that I was homeless. I was homeless for 8 months. And my best friend's dad, James's dad, took me in and I lived with him, right? And how a huge amount of my life ended up changing is that in the path of trying to change my life, I ended up working in a school as a behavior support worker. And then in working in the behavior support working team, basically loads of students would tell me stuff. And I would have to make safeguarding referrals. And, oh, by the way, where was I living? I was living in a tent. I was living in a tent, and at that time I was stealing from Co-op. I'd go into Co-op and I'd steal food, and I'd steal vodka from Co-op. Oh God, that period in my life was hectic. And I'd go into shops and try to steal food. Yeah, that was a crazy part of my life, horrible part of my life actually. Because you feel dirty, you feel shameless, you're living in secrecy again. Oh, it was just madness. And so whilst working in school, I was making a lot of, kids were basically telling me a lot of stuff, because remember, I wasn't a teacher. I wasn't academically trained. So kids felt safe to tell me stuff. And kids were telling me loads and loads and loads and loads of stuff. And I was making loads of referrals. And the school would say to me all the time, Kasim, you should become a safeguarding lead. And I was like, no, can't become a safeguarding lead because it doesn't pay very much money. And then one day somebody said to me, you should become a counselor. I was like, I can't become a counselor because I'm dumb. Remember that thing of I'm unworthy and I've grown up and I'm not an academics person, right? So I was like, I couldn't become a counselor because those people are like academic people, Then one day I was sat, back in those days, I used to meet my friend and every month we'd go for drinks. And one day I was sat in a bar, we were having this monthly meetup where we'd basically go to a bar and just get absolutely smashed. And one day I was sat in a bar with my friend, and it was about 12 o'clock, 12:30, and a man walked into the bar, sat next to me, and he said, I've just come out of prison. I stabbed somebody a long time ago, and today's the first day I came out of prison. And this man told us, me and my friend, his story, and blah, 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 blah. And after he left, my friend said to me, Kasim, do you realize that people tell you really crazy and personal things that they shouldn't say about you? And I said, not really. Because I basically thought that people just tell everyone stuff. I just thought it was normal for people to tell like really deep personal things about themselves. I didn't realize that this was uncommon. I didn't realize that people told me, felt safe around me, and that they would tell me loads of things. It just had never occurred to me. And he said, you should do something like counseling or something. Now, then the penny dropped, because I'm having the school telling me that I should become a counselor. Now my friend is saying to me that I should become a counselor. And at that time, I was thinking about ways that I could basically help people, right? And that is how I obviously started training to become a counselor and a psychotherapist. And in this time, it was when I decided, okay, I want to help people. I want to tell my story. I want to help people. And that's when I started writing books, and I started doing these sort of videos and doing, what do you call them? Doing podcasts and stuff like that. And just basically telling people that you can improve your life and you can change things around, and how the beginning of your life isn't how it has to be. But a huge amount of it starts with awareness. You've got to actually look at your story. You've got to look at where you've been. You've got to start examining your life. You've got to, like yesterday I was talking to a student in my counseling, and I said to him, look, you've been through some really dramatic things. You need to start looking at what were the good and what were the bad. Okay, you've gone through extreme things in your life. You've said to me that bad things and good things have happened. Well, let's look at that. What is good and what's bad? What do you want to take forward, moving forward into your life, and what don't you want to take? And so, yeah, that's kind of how I've ended up here speaking to you today. And as I say, I don't know whether any of this is going to resonate with you. I don't know whether it's going to make sense. I don't know whether it's hit home at all. But yeah, there was a lot of shame, a lot of fear, a lot of self-loathing, a lot of feeling unworthy in my story. And by the way, one of the other things that I wanted to write down here, just talk about here, which is, because I think this has really been a really integral part. Sometimes people say to me, Kasim, why do you think you made it? Why is it that a lot of people go through really difficult things and they try to kill themselves and they don't make it through? And basically, I'd actually tried to kill myself before. This wasn't the first time. When I was 24, that wasn't the first time I tried to kill myself. But that's a long story, which I don't want to get into because I don't want to trigger you or anything like that. But basically, what had happened was there were 3 people in my life who had played a major part as to why I'm so positive, and I was always in conflict over my life. The first one was James and James's dad, my best friend. The second was a woman called Donna and Ben. And the third was a guy called, no, it's 4 people, I'm lying. The third was a guy called Patrick Applin, and the fourth was Amy Stevens and Gary Stevens. So, in my life, Donna Stevens, and who was Ben's mum, had always said to me, Kasim, you're going to do great things in your life. Kasim, you have so much potential. Kasim, there's something different about you. She'd always said this to me when I was growing up, but I never really understood why she said this to me. Ben lived on the same council estate as me when I was growing up, and I never understood why she kept saying this to me, but she would say this to me all the time. James is the only person, who's my best friend, is the only person in my life who's never rejected me. Even James actually, basically let me go back. One time I went through a situation where basically when I was absolutely drunk, I had gotten into a bed with one of our friends and I'd woken up and I was naked with him, and I think I'd had a boner when we were absolutely smashed. And this had circled around my friends, and Ben had asked, not Ben, James had asked me if I was gay, and James had said to me, it doesn't matter, like if you are, like I'll still accept you and whatever. And yeah, anyway, and basically James was the only person who I felt ever accepted me for who I was, and he never quit on me. To this day, I actually haven't spoken to James in ages and I haven't seen him, but he still messages me. He still remembers my birthday, all kinds of things. The third was Patrick Applin. Patrick's dad, when I was younger and I was living in Devon, would basically like take me in. He introduced me to one of my favorite drinks called Dernaline and Burdock. And he was just such a nice person, right? And I just didn't understand. It's interesting actually, because now that I reflect on it, it's interesting. I've always been drawn to men in my life who are much older. All my jobs have always been in places where people have been much older than me. And it's interesting because clearly I must have been looking for some guidance, some leadership. And the last person was Amy Stevens and Gary Stevens. Amy was the first girl I ever had a crush on. And her dad bought me and he didn't buy me, he gave me his PlayStation, portable PlayStation. And I never forgot that. And that made a real impression on me, because all of these men in my life and these women had invested in me and saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And they were kind to me. And I was like, see, it was like, the world has been so horrible to me and I've suffered so much and I've been through so much pain, yet look at all of these incredible people, right? My stepdad took me in and he raised me as his son. He didn't have to do that, right? He would teach me things. He paid for my school uniform. He would take me to training. He bought me a bike, all of these things. And I was like, he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to take on my mum who already had a kid. And yet he did. He would turn up to parents' evening, all of this sort of stuff. So this really just created a cognitive, what's called in psychology, cognitive dissonance in me, which is where I was always torn. And part of why I'm so hopeful and really why I wanted to do this video and these videos and write my books is because I've come to realize that we all need somebody who's a little bit further than us to believe in us. There is such a thing as a chosen family, that you can go through so much pain and you can be abandoned by everybody and you can suffer and you can have been backstabbed and all this sort of stuff. But there are people out there who will love you, who will protect you, who will defend you, who will look after you, and who care for you, even if you're not their own child, even if you're not their own blood. And that was a crazy concept to me, you know. So that is where I'm going to leave it. You know what to do. If you have any questions, email me. If there's a part of my story you want me to delve into, ask me. But I've basically changed a lot. And just to finish off, I changed. Part of why my life is, people I guess find my life so inspiring, is because I have spent the last 6-7 years basically doing a lot of work on myself. Therapy, journaling, writing, exploring this stuff, like really doing the work. I've cried, it's been painful, it's been so horrible to really look at my story and really look at the truth and the reality of my life. It's been horrible, right? Because I've had to really face things that I haven't really wanted to face and revisit things that I really haven't wanted to revisit. And even now, please don't take it that I'm perfect or that I've arrived. I've made my way, I've given some of my story distance, which is why I'm able to speak about it so openly. And I've really explored it, I've worked through it, which is why I'm able to talk about it so as if without any shame or without any hurt or anything like that. But yeah, so what I basically finish off and I recommend to you is start to begin your story. Start to truth seeking and deconstruct. Look at where you've been, what have you been through, what your story is. I think that's where we begin. And I think when we do that, it really, really, really begins to alleviate a lot of the healing in our lives. That's why I decided to become a counselor, because I saw that once people told their story, it really, really gave, when it came to their pain, it probably equated to about 60% of the relief of their pain. And it all came with just telling your story, right? That may be through journaling, writing a song, poetry, whatever it is, whatever vehicle you choose. But just start telling your story a little bit. What happened to you? You know, don't be one of these people who I see, particularly in my therapy room, who say, yeah, but I know my story is this, but other people have had it worse. Yes, I get it. But let's hear your story. You know, people say to me all the time, you really want to hear my story? I'm like, yeah, tell me. And sometimes just telling your story is so relieving for people. So we'll finish there. Thank you very much for listening, guys. As I say, email me, send me a message. If there's a part of my story you don't understand, etc., let me know. But I hope it's been of some utility to you. Thanks. Bye for now.